boys get loud. When the whistle blows, we make quite the crowd. When the sun sets low on Friday. From the pubs in Ireland to Tennessee, from the west coast down to Myrtle Beach, showing every little town here and in between. Yeah, we know how to party on Friday. And the band plays on and the tops they flow. The boss man's yelling, but we've all gone home. Come a Monday morning, I will atone. But tonight ain't Monday, it's Friday. Well, I like my job, but I love my friends. Seem to where I'll be when the work week ends. At the little country tavern just around the bend. When the sun sets low on Friday. And the band plays on and the tops stay low. The boss man's yelling, but we've all gone home. Come the Monday morning, I will atone. But tonight ain't Monday, it's Friday. Ha! There's a place in town where we all hang out, where the country girls go and the boys get loud. When the whistle blows, we make quite the crowd. When the sun sets low on Friday. And the band plays on and the tops they flow. The boss man's yelling, but we've all gone home. Come a Monday morning, I will atone. But tonight ain't Monday, it's Friday. Tonight ain't Monday, it's Friday. Tonight ain't Monday, it's Friday.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah, it's Friday. It's Friday. It's been a long week. Goodness gracious. It has been a super long week. Did anybody realize how close we are to Christmas? I'm getting a really good drive on it. Gosh. I know there's a lot of people looking for replacements for Frogmorton's and Frogmorton Cellar and on the town and not me. Just go with it. It's good stuff. All right. So we've got this is going to be a more positive. I try to always end my Let Her Rip Fridays on a positive note. They ran really long, and I haven't had a bunch of questions for everybody. But going forward, if you have any questions, reviews, whatever you like, going forward, if you could leave them down in the what one guy that I really like calls it the doobly doo. If you can leave it down there in the little doobly doo, I'll answer them at the next one, or one several ones on them. I'm trying to get a bit ahead of my videos just because timelines are not always there, but I'll have probably a couple more of these, and I imagine by then I will probably get more questions, which then I can start answering questions. So I will build up a amount of questions. I've been trying to build up about 4 or 5 for it, just because I don't know. I like the questions. I like watching videos where they have questions. You know, it's one of those things. So let's talk about a few things. So China was hitting us with, tariffs. Surprise, surprise. An aspect of the FDA regulations with the new labeling that I believe some people did not really pay attention to or get a full grasp on is the social media aspect of this, because there's so many restrictions on the labeling. We'll get into that in a minute, but there was apparently that's a new part of the thing that's going on is how do you deal with that on the social media side? The other thing is the chalk one up for the good guys. Ding. Wish I had a little bell. I'd go ding, but I don't, so it doesn't matter. So let's get into it. So the very first one, China just slammed massive tariffs on $34 billion worth of U.S. goods, and I mean it's basically everything. Some of the things that were noted on here were your typical stuff. However, I mean, some of the things that they looked at included consumable products, which is a little bit different than what the U.S. is doing. So things like soybeans, pork, fish, orange juice, whiskey, tobacco products are going to be included in that. But this is basically a response to President Donald Trump's 25% tariff on $34 billion worth of Chinese goods. China's Ministry of Commerce announced tariffs of equal size on certain U.S. exports to China. The first $34 billion will be followed up by another $16 billion once the U.S.'s second tranche goes into effect in a few weeks. So they're basically coming after us the same way. The difference is, though, is Trump's tariffs are mostly focused on industrial and tech goods, where China is focusing heavily on agricultural products from the U.S. Not only will this focus direct pain on what they say is Trump's own political supporters, but the focus on perishable goods also leaves U.S. farmers with fewer options to divert their crops. So there was an instance that a U.S. cherry producer told the Washington Post that a shipment to China was diverted for further inspections and the cherries went bad. And so they're just out those crops because the shipment had to turn back. Now, they don't know if that delay was caused by the tariffs or anything like that, but they are absolutely speculating, and I'm speculating, that it might have something to do with it. I'm sure it does. But I mean, meat, fish, seafood, dairy, vegetables, nuts, fruits, grain derivatives. I mean, it's tough. However, that's it. That's enough bad news. Let's talk about some of the good news. Well, this isn't quite good news. Let's level off. This isn't quite good or bad. So, warnings on websites and social media, what retailers should know. So, based off the FDA's new warning requirements that are coming up in the August 10th deadline, new warning requirements for the so-called advertisements may apply to their online social media forms for retailers and distributors, manufacturers, so on. Note that the regulations do not define advertisement for these purposes, and the FDA has yet to provide promised guidance on including compliant warnings in unique advertising formats. So that's where it becomes very arbitrary. So they've got to get something up, but there's been no guidance. So immediately you could get slammed with some kind of fine, penalty, something, because you're not compliant with what they want you to do. So what warnings do I need to incorporate on my website if I was a retailer? For one, you need to incorporate the appropriate warning statement so that it occupies at least 20% of the viewable screen size. Two, you need to display the warning in the upper portion of every page on which an advertisement appears. And you have to have the warning visible at all times, even when you're scrolling down. So if you're scrolling down on a website, it cannot just disappear. That has to. So it's basically going to block a big chunk of your website. And you have to ensure that the warning statement meets the additional formatting requirements for advertising warning statements. Now, what about if you have a Facebook? Okay, what do you got to do there? Well, the warning statement should occupy 20% of the visual component, appear in the upper portion, and comply with the other formatting requirements. Text-only posts with such content may also require some inclusion of warnings. But if you're just, if it's just about your store, you're fine. It's only if you're referencing the actual products that you're selling. What about an Instagram page? What should you do? Well, similar to Facebook, if you post product-specific content, you may require inclusion of a warning statement. So that's there. What about Twitter? What about a Twitter? Well, retailer tweets with images that include product-specific content may require inclusion of a warning statement. Here's part of it that's a little funky, though. How the FDA would require compliance with the requirement appears less clear for Twitter due to the 200-character limitation. So, that kind of puts a little damper on there because, you've got people that are using Twitter and all these other different formats. What are you supposed to do? The Nimrod being a wang rod. I did a review on this, by the way. There we go. I did an in-depth review. Oh yeah, the retro on this is great. So yeah, this is the Frogmorton on the town. Please note that if you ever use a cartridge like this as a tamper, please make sure that the primer is no longer there. I don't know if anybody's, had a, round cartridge discharge or primer discharge on them, but I would hope that everybody would make sure, I don't want to see somebody using that and all of a sudden it blow up in their face. That would not be good. All right. Last few coming up. This one's going to be shorter than last week, I think. Possibly. We'll see. And the week before that. And the week before that. Who knows? All right. So, here we are. Decision to move Texas FDA cigar lawsuit appealed. So attorneys for 3 Texas-based cigar businesses that sued the U.S. Food and Drug Administration over its cigar regulations have appealed a decision from earlier in the week of July 6th at some point, so earlier that week, that moved their lawsuit to a Washington, D.C. court. On that Tuesday, U.S. Magistrate Judge Kimberly Priest Johnson issued a ruling that moved the Texas lawsuit to the U.S. District Court for the District of Columbia. That decision was a reversal of a ruling that Priest Johnson made in May, denying FDA's request to combine the 2 lawsuits. So there's more than one, apparently. Basically, in her ruling, the judge cited a recent appeal filing, and this is one of those things. If under the huge win, what I should have put there under huge win is pro-life equals pro-cigar and pipes. Just stay with me on this one, okay? Pro-life equals pro-cigar and tobacco. Let's take another drink up to pro-life, cigar and tobacco. Stay with me. So, Pre-Johnson cited a recent appeal filing in the D.C. lawsuit. As it turns out, the D.C. motion was heard and ultimately led to the D.C. court ruling that the FDA's warning label requirements would be delayed until 60 days after an appeals court decides the appeal brought by 3 cigar trade groups, a major win for cigar industry. The Texas lawsuit was filed by Enfuego, which is a Dallas area cigar shop, El Cubana Cigars of League City, and the Texas Cigar Merchants Association. Now, so essentially, there's more than one lawsuit out there, and it's a big deal. We'll get into the pro-life in the next one. It's a big deal to keep these separate. And the reason for that is keeping the Texas lawsuit separate would benefit the industry's legal strategy for several reasons, including forcing the FDA to defend itself in multiple courtrooms, a potentially more favorable judge in Texas, and, at the most basic level, having a second legal option in the D.C. appeal if the D.C. appeal is not successful. So those are beneficial. Now, the next article I have, I'll have to start linking these. The courthouse news from July 6th. Cigar and pipe tobacco firms can forego health warning statements. Okay, what's this one about? Well, the cigar and pipe tobacco companies will not have to add health warning statements to their products on August 10th, a federal judge has ruled. The rule will be delayed until 60 days after the D.C. Circuit rules on an appeal from cigar and pipe retailer associations. The FDA rule at issue will require U.S. District Judge Amit Mehta said Thursday that the May 2016 Food and Drug Administration rule will be delayed until 60 days after the D.C. Circuit Court rules on an appeal from cigar and pipe retailers. So it's basically getting an additional 60 days. The FDA rule at issue will require cigar and pipe tobacco products to display one of 6 large warning statements, much like those found on the cigarette packs, on their products and advertisements about the health risks of cigar and nicotine use. Now, Meta's July 5th opinion notes that the appeal presents serious legal questions about the constitutionality of the FDA's rule, particularly in light of a recent Supreme Court decision. Pay attention on this one because this is where I'm linking pro-life to tobacco. In a recent Supreme Court decision in National Institute of Family and Life Advocates versus Becerra, which held that anti-abortion crisis pregnancy centers don't have to tell pregnant women about state services, including abortions, because they're a pro-life group. So that's not something that they want to do, and they were basically being forced into doing that. And that ruling there was a precedent set for them. In a 5-4 ruling in the case, conservatives on the court said the California law at issue in the case likely violates the First Amendment. And I'm telling you, if you're going to go for an amendment, might as well go straight to the top, right? So Meta noted that the First Amendment challenge to the FDA's warning regime involves complex legal questions, including whether the government's interest is substantial, what burden it bears to compel factual government speech, and whether the size of the warnings chills protected speech. One of the biggest concerns is they don't know if the information that they have to put on the warnings and everything is factual. That's kind of crazy, isn't it? The association say the rule would cost, and this is another big deal. The association say that the rule would cost the industry millions, and had argued that the FDA rule violates the Tobacco Control Act, the Administrative Procedure Act, and the First Amendment. Plaintiffs likely will suffer irreparable harm absent injunctive relief. They will have to communicate poorly or purely factual government speech in a form and size to which they object, will have their own commercial speech diminished, and will have to incur millions of dollars in compliance costs. which they will not be able to recover if the warnings regime is determined to be unconstitutional. And that's what the opinion says. So, Scott Pierce, the executive director of the International Premium Cigar and Pipe Retailers Association, welcomed the ruling. This deadline has been bearing down on our members for some time now, and while this is temporary reprieve, it is a welcome development, hopefully a sign that the message is resonating, Pierce said. I mean, that's a pretty big deal. So it wasn't necessarily whether they questioned the factual information, I guess, is more of they were having to put something on their product that they didn't necessarily agree with. And, I mean, that's... Now, granted, we have to do that all the time. There was another article, a day later, federal judge halts cigar regulations. It's a commonplace to say that protecting free speech benefits everyone. But in this case, cliche came out of its cage. In a matchup of the unlikeliest of bedfellows, I love people that talk this way, the speech of pro-lifers is helping cigar makers. So basically, here's the story. Cigars have traditionally been regulated differently than cigarettes. Much of the federal government's cigarette regulations are targeted at the dual concerns that cigarettes are addictive and often abused by minors. Cigars, however, are generally less addictive and less in vogue with rebellious youth. The first national requirements for health warnings on cigar products were not enacted until 2001. This all changed in 2016 when the FDA announced that cigars and pipe tobacco would be subject to the same regulations as cigarettes. Cigar makers, many of which are small business, naturally worried they couldn't afford the cost of the FDA compliance. The pre-market review process for new products would require even small cigar makers to submit thousands of sample cigars to the FDA. They oppose. I wonder if they're just going to sit there and smoke them. What are they testing? Okay? I get the chemical part of it, but you only need a little piece for chemical. So what are they doing with the rest? Are they just smoking the rest of them? Wouldn't that be rich? Oh my gosh. They opposed the regulations from the start, but after a few years of back and forth, the regulations were approved and poised to take effect later this year. A coalition of cigar makers and nonprofits challenged the religious regulations in court. They argued that the FDA's actions were arbitrary and could not rationally further the FDA's stated interest in protecting minors from addictive substances. So basically, they're saying these warning labels are really not going to help reduce the abuse of the tobacco products, like the FDA is saying they're trying to do. But most interestingly, the cigar makers argued that the FDA's required health disclosure violated their First Amendment right to free speech. The FDA regulations required that the health warnings comprise 30% of all cigar display packages and 20% of all cigar advertisements. These disclosures would be about 200% larger than required under previous regulations. According to the cigar makers, these requirements compel them to speak the government message. That's a big one. That's a tough. I mean, either way, I mean you're fighting the government, and it's nothing I ever recommend or suggest. But if you're going to do it, go all out, baby. If you're going to hit an amendment, hit that first one. So I hope everybody's having a great week. Again, leave any. I've got a few more videos coming. Some might have already posted, but leave comments down in the doobly-doo, and let me know any questions you have. Anything you might want to see reviewed or what have you. I mean, I don't care. You want to see this reviewed? You want to see this reviewed? Who cares? You want to see it? You want to see it? Fine. I'll do it. Not a big deal. What about even, despite reviews, what about just questions? Any general questions? Do you have questions? Can I help you with your questions? I need questions. Please give me questions. Until next time. and all those taglines, stick that in your pipe and smoke it. I just was smoke from the right side. How's that?